Hey guys, welcome back to my kitchen. So today I'm going to be doing a little bit of food preservation. So I think that food preservation is one of those things that when you think about it, a lot of times people will think of things like Little House on the Prairie or preppers or people who like live on farms. And the truth is I live on a small farm. It's 2 acres, but it's still a farm. And we love living on our homestead, and we do try to produce as much of our own food as possible. But most of what I preserve doesn't even come from our own property. It comes from either other farmers, from co-ops, from the farmers market, and a lot of times even just from the grocery store. And so I wanted to talk about how food preservation can be super beneficial no matter where you're getting your food from. So there's tons of different ways that you can preserve food. Basically, food preservation just means that you are saving food to be able to use it in another way or to use it later on. So the first thing that I like to preserve is milk. So we get our milk from a local farmer and we love it. It is one of our favorite foods. And I like to get a lot at one time, more usually than we will just drink. We do drink a lot of milk. We have it every single day, but we still like to buy a lot of it because I love to preserve it in other ways. So you can use milk to make things like cheese or, it's heavy, yogurt. So this is a giant thing of yogurt. I had some milk that was kind of on its last leg and starting to kind of go bad, and before it could go bad I wanted to use it for something. It was too much milk for us to just try to drink, which probably wouldn't have been a great idea anyway, and so I decided to go ahead and make it into yogurt. I make yogurt almost every week. It is something that we love to have in our house, but it's also another really great way to preserve milk. So once you have cooked it, it basically takes on a whole new life. So you are able to keep and use that milk for a lot longer if you are preserving it as something else. Another thing that I find myself preserving quite often are bananas. So in our house, it's either feast or famine with bananas. Sometimes my kids, and honestly, if I'm being perfectly honest myself, sometimes we love bananas and we just can't get enough of them, and everything that we buy, we eat before it will go even the least bit brown. But sometimes that is not the case. And recently that hasn't been the case. And so I just grabbed these today. But I do have some bananas that are starting to go definitely a little bit brown. And so I want to not let those go to waste. I don't want to just end up throwing them away. So I am going to freeze them. Freezing is another really great way to preserve food, and it is how I'm going to preserve our bananas that don't look like this anymore. So when you freeze them, obviously you're probably not going to just take that out and eat it. It's going to change the texture of it for sure, but I can pull them out and thaw them out and use them to make things like banana nut muffins or banana bread or banana cake, or I can use them in smoothies, which is probably what we will do. So since they're already going to be frozen, we can take them out and put them in our blender with our other frozen fruit and have bananas in our smoothies. And then the last way that I am going to preserve food today is going to be canning. Now, before you just immediately think, oh, I can't do that, or I don't have the stuff to do that, I want to say that this is actually one of those things that really, really scared me when I started homesteading, when I started cooking from scratch. In fact, when I started cooking from scratch, this was just so far off of my radar. It was not something that I would have even considered ever doing, because it seemed so far out of the realm of possibility of things that I could do. And now it's just kind of second nature. So the first thing that I will say is you have to have the correct equipment. So I am going to be pressure canning meat. I have a roast that I bought. I got it thinking, oh, I'm gonna make this and have like a huge meal for a lot of people, and then that ended up not panning out. So I had this roast that had been in my freezer and I needed it to make a giant meal, so I took it out of my freezer and I completely thawed it. So I couldn't put it back in my freezer again. You can't refreeze raw meat, but I did need to use it in some way. So I decided I could cook it and then stick it back in my freezer cooked. That's perfectly safe, you can do that. But instead of doing that, I wanted to can it. Now, I can a lot of beef, shredded beef. We use it for a lot of different things in our house. And it is one of those things that once we had it on our shelves in our pantry, I don't ever want to do without it. And so this was just the perfect opportunity to not let that giant roast go to waste and to use it for something that will be really beneficial for my family for weeks to come. So this morning I took my roast, the giant roast that I had, out of my refrigerator, and I put it in my Instant Pot just with some water and some salt and pepper, and I pressure cooked that thing on high for 4 hours just to get it as tender as absolutely possible, because the next thing that we are going to do is shred it. I let the meat cool, and then I started to shred it up. I'm almost done shredding it, and this ended up being a lot more meat than I thought it was going to be. I am not entirely sure how many meals this will end up being for us, but we like to use this stuff mostly for either sandwiches or for tacos. And so for my family of 6, we usually will use 1 jar of meat for a meal. And so just however many jars I end up filling with this is how many meals we're going to get out of it. So I can tell by looking at it it's going to be more than 1. So I'm glad that I decided to go ahead and preserve this meat like this. This is my pressure canner. This is my Instant Pot. So I cannot pressure can in my Instant Pot. I have seen several videos where people talk about doing it, and I guess if you really, really want to, you can try it. This is tested to know that it comes up to temperature, that it is making really safe food. This is not tested at all. And so I am going to only can things in something that has been tested. So I need to get my canner set up. So I'm going to plug it in, and then this all is just worked with these dials down here. So it says it's on pressure can, so I'm going to hit the middle button. And then because I am doing pint jars, the bigger one, of meat, I want to pressure can it for 90 minutes. So I am going to hit that, and then it's going to start to warm up. I am going to put water into the fill line where it tells me to put it, the bottom fill line, because I'm pressure canning. And then I am going to put my jars in with about halfway full of water. So I'm going to fill my jars up about this much with water. This is just going to heat my jars. This is keeping me from having to put them in the oven or anything. Everything is just done right in the pressure canner, which is really handy. So I'm not sure how many jars I am going to end up needing, but I am going to err on the side of caution because I want to make sure and get those jars heated up. So I am going to put the top on, and then I'm just going to hit the play button, and then that is telling me that it is warming up. So it's warming those jars up, it's heating that water up. So while I'm waiting on my canner to heat up my jars, I am going to get started on the broth that I am going to can my meat in. So this is not a place that I would use like collagen rich bone broth. Of course you can if you want to, but this is absolutely a place that I'm just gonna use like a powdered bouillon, or this is a powdered beef broth from Azure. I'm pretty sure that it's just freeze-dried beef broth, which is really handy. But I am just going to add some of this to some water. The only reason that I'm doing this is because when you can meat, you do have to have some sort of a liquid in there in order for it to can and seal properly. So I'm just doing beef broth just because it's super basic and easy. And then the other 2 things that you're really going to need, or at least that will be super, super helpful, are the jar grabber thing. I don't know the appropriate terms, but this thing that picks the jars up, and a funnel. So a jar funnel, that is one thing. I use this thing for everything. I am constantly using this to fill jars up. So it's definitely one thing that if you're going to be canning things or just using jars, I would strongly suggest grabbing one of these. Okay, so we went from warm, we have flies, they're everywhere right now. We went from warm to where it said fill jars, and so that just tells me that it's time to take the jars out, they're hot, and pour the water out, and then we are ready to start stuffing them. So this is kind of where we get to see how many jars we're actually going to get to use, which is kind of fun. So I just have our meat, so our jars are hot, our meat is still warm, and then the liquid that I have that is going in is hot. So I am going to just, as best as I can, stuff in here. I would suggest using wide mouth jars if you have them. These just happen to be the ones that I had available that got brought down to me. So this is what we're gonna use, which is fine. This works really well too. So I am just going to stuff that meat in there. I'm gonna leave enough room so that some liquid can get around it, but I wanna make sure and get as much meat in each jar as I can. I'm going to take a paper towel and I'm just going to dip it in some vinegar just to clean off the top, and that's going to clear off any of the excess fat or oil that has gotten on the top, and that will just ensure that you have a seal far more often. I need to add my lids, so you cannot reuse any lids that you have used before. So I have a brand new box of lids and I'm just going to set them on top, and then I'm going to grab some rings out of my drawer and put those on, and then it'll be time to put them back into the canner. Okay, so our canner, it says fill jars. When it went from just saying warm to adding that fill jar on the bottom, that's when I took my jars out, and I didn't hit anything else because now that water is warm, the jars are warm, everything that was in the jars is warm, and it is going to ensure that it is safely canned when you do that. So I'm just going to use my tongs and grab my jars and put them in that warmed water. Once I do that, I want to take my lid, and this little black thing right here pops right off. Get water everywhere. That thing pops off, and then you put your lid back on and lock it, and then hit play. And then it is going to heat up. There's going to start to be steam coming out of the top, and there will be a point that it tells us to put this back on. And when that point comes, you take it and you just click it right back on, and this thing points to can. So it says can vent, can vent, can vent all around. So you just pick one of the cans and you point the pointer toward it, you stick it back on, and then your timer will start to actually start the canning process. So that is it. It is so simple to can stuff. It does take a little bit of time, but that canner has definitely saved us a ton of money in the end. So we have our meat all canned up. I actually, if I'm honest, this was already on my shelf. I'm finishing canning the other stuff right now, but this is gonna be our dinner tonight, and I'm really excited about it. My kids really love it. So I love to just completely empty this out into my skillet and then add some au jus to it, and I heat it and boil it for about 10 or 15 minutes just to make sure that it is as safe as possible to eat. And then we will just have it on some deli rolls with some provolone cheese and some fruit on the side, and maybe even some chips or something to go with it. So that's going to be our dinner tonight, and that is how easy honestly it is to preserve food. So 3 different ways. We turned milk into yogurt, froze bananas, and canned some roast to have as sandwiches. We also use this a lot for taco meat. But yeah, it's 3 different ways that we preserve stuff and kept from wasting a lot of food that otherwise really may have ended up going into the trash. So that's all for today, guys. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time.